Welcome to a special edition of the Deep Six. I'm Steve Cochran in Chicago, and you are?
I am Patty Steele, and I am in the vicinity of New York City. I live in Montclair, New Jersey. Here I am.
And Patty's son Jake is with us as well because there's an amazing conversation we'll tell you about in a second. But just to make this sort of a sea to shining sea thing, Jake, where are you right now?
Boulder, Colorado.
And that's where you live now?
Yeah, for the time being, I attend CU Boulder out here. I'm a creative writing major.
And history.
Yes, history minor.
Yes.
American history or world history?
World history.
Yeah.
I'm a history nut, and they always make this joke about guys as they get older, they develop an interest in World War II. But I'll be in my office and I'm watching the American Heroes Channel or the History Channel or National Geographic or the Smithsonian Channel, any of those, and my wife will come in and go, "Do I need to tell you how that war ended? Because you've seen this quite a few times."
This is like me with Lincoln, you know. In fact, right before I hooked up with you, I was looking at a recipe online here for an Abraham Lincoln cake, which everybody's going to get stuffed in their face this weekend.
Sure.
So,
well, and I think we all remember what a great cook Lincoln was from his show.
Yes, that was his thing, right?
Yeah, his cooking show. At any rate, the reason we're all together here is for a topic that's very important and very personal to us.
Yeah.
I have a brother who I'll tell you more about in a second. Patty's son, Jake, is here for the specific reason. They had an amazing conversation the other day, which you're going to hear on this podcast, that I was very moved by. It was very courageous on behalf of both of you, talking about Jake's struggles. And Patty, this is a big decision to go ahead and do this. What did you guys talk about before you decided you wanted to do a podcast about this?
Well, I am blessed with a son who is very communicative. We speak a lot, and Jake went through, as you will hear when we do the interview, Jake went through a long struggle with opiate addiction, most specifically heroin, and it was an incredibly painful and growing time for all of us, obviously Jake most specifically, but as a parent, you pile it on yourself in so many ways. What did I do? How did this happen? Now, how do I fix it? How do I take this little boy and put a Band-Aid on this problem? And it took me a long time to understand that that's the last thing I needed to do, that this was about Jake kind of reclaiming himself and finding love for himself. And so we had talked about that a lot. And ultimately, I had talked to him many times about possibly doing an interview / podcast about his addiction. And Jake, tell me how you felt. You finally, for a long time, you didn't want to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I finally made the choice to, clean myself up, it was like a switch went off in my head. And for some reason, I started in the beginning, I developed this, kind of, how do I put it? I developed this, how do I put it? Almost like an anger. I didn't understand, I looked at my life up until that point and I was like, why did I make these choices? And it got to the point where I just wanted to push it all away. And that was the beginning of my recovery. And I was like that for a couple years. And, as I've, went down the path, as I've gone down the path of recovery, I kind of have tried to, push myself to kind of see it in a better light, and maybe try to do something to help people, that were in a similar situation to what I was in at the time. I felt ready, now I feel ready to do something like that. And
it's a big deal to go public. It's a big deal to talk about it publicly.
It is.
It's a big deal for your mom to say, let's do this together.
And for him to, I think, it's funny because I liken it to, they talk about illness and the stages that you go through. And I sort of saw him in terms of his recovery, going through those stages, an early stage in which he had finally begun to get past it. But while he was in it, he was angry at us and at himself and at the world. And then as he began his recovery, the anger didn't go away right away. He was angry. You were angry still at us. And there was
but even more so myself, like I was just.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. It's what I heard was anger on your part towards us. And I think that, and then as I began to listen, instead of trying to defend myself, I could hear that this anger was really doubling down on you. And this sense of, what did I do to my life? What did I do to my family? And so there was all of these sort of steps that you went through before you got to the point where you said, okay, I'm ready to share this. I think there are still, don't you think there are still some steps you need to go through?
Oh, definitely. And honestly, even doing stuff like this podcast, I consider a step, because it's me accepting everything that happened and, kind of analyzing it in a way that, isn't just, oh, how the hell did I screw my life up so bad? Or, I've begun to kind of look at it almost like, that's where my life was. And it took me to where I'm at now, and I'm happy where I'm at. So I might as well start to accept everything that happened and not, be angry about it,
There's the 5 stages, Patty, you and I haven't talked about this, but there's the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I've always thought you can apply them directly to addiction.
Yeah.
Because you start off with denial.
Yeah.
You're angry and you're bargaining. I'll use one more time. I'll use tomorrow. Then I'll get over it. Depression comes when you realize you can't beat it. Acceptance comes when you know you need help. And it's the first step in any 12-step program, is, realizing you're powerless over what controls you. So working those steps of grief and, grieving your old life is something that's totally normal. And it's something that, I think the key for you, for my brother, for anybody that goes through this, is to understand what happened, to not try to bury it because it was part of your life, but realize your life isn't designed or defined by what you deem as a failure of how you acted then, but by the success of what you chose and how you're going to live the rest of your life.
Steve, how did your brother, because I know there were some other challenges with him.
Sure.
How did you guys get to the point where A, you recognized the problem, and then separately B, began to deal with it?
Well, it's a complex story. We're both adopted, so there isn't a bloodline connection there. We know that there are genetics involved with alcoholism in particular, but certain aspects of drug action and your proclivity to become an addict. In my brother's case, the woman that gave birth to him was drug addicted, never stopped using, never stopped drinking, and had no interest in raising him, and abandoned him when he was a baby. When he was 2 days old, he was finally rescued. But this was he's a little older than I am. So this is 1958. Nobody was talking about fetal alcohol syndrome. Nobody was talking about anything related to that. So the damage that was done at that point was unclear. As he grew up, it was clear that he had learning disabilities, communication disabilities, but also very high function to live his life and the ability to be positive. As far as recognizing the problem, my father was an alcoholic, an abusive alcoholic. My mother was a functional alcoholic. I think it's a real term.
Sure.
And all the family around us drinking all the time. I had an ulcer when I was 5 years old. It's not it's not a line. And it was a mess.
You described it to me as kind of being the only grown-up in the house at the age of 5.
Yeah, I felt like I had to fix everything when I was a little kid. And, you're not supposed to grow up that way. Now, having said that, to be fair, my parents did the best that they could most of the time. When they didn't do the best that they could, the failures were dramatic. And with someone like my brother who had special needs, to treat him in a way that he was treated, which was everybody said, well, if we get him beer, he'll drink around us. That way we can keep an eye on him because, he's going to drink anyway. And the amazing thing that comes out of this interview, you'll hear with him in a few minutes, is him talking about that, because we literally in our entire lives, we've never had the conversation about why did you drink? It would seem it would come up right away, but why did you drink? And he said this thing that I think is a very important point for people to get. He said, because he wanted to be cool and he wanted to be like everybody else.
Yep. And I think that's a key. I think that's a main point with most addicts. I mean, for me, it was the same thing. I just wanted, like, my addiction started with me just wanting to find a place to fit in, specifically in high school, and at that age, when you're so impressionable, you see, the kids partying and people having fun, and you think that's what I want to be. I want to be cool, and I feel that can be a major reason that many addicts turn to alcohol or drugs. It's to find that place.
Yeah, and you don't start it right, Jake. You don't start going, man, it's going to be great. In about a month, I'm really going to be screwed up, because you just start to fit in and to be able to go to these parties and not feel like an outsider. And trying to be cool or whatever the case may be. And it gets out of control very quickly. And then you got to try to reel it back in. And it could have killed you. It certainly could have killed my brother. But I think it's an important thing, Patty, for people to get as well. Booze doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you grew up poor in a house that was completely dysfunctional. It doesn't care if you grew up with some money, with parents that love you. Booze and drugs don't care. And it can happen to anybody. And you need to take that off the table if you're struggling with addiction, because if it's happening to you or it's happening to somebody you love, the circumstances don't matter.
Oh, isn't that the truth? And sometimes, and it was certainly true in our case, you think, well, this can't possibly be something that's going to own my kid. And you think that, and this was, I guess, where my failing came in. What am I going to say failing? I was trying. You think, I'm going to find someone or some place that will fix him. And so you try all these doctors, you try all these rehab facilities, these halfway houses. And first you think, no, I've got to give, I want to take him somewhere that's beautiful. And, I remember the first place we took him was sort of, it looked like you were at this inn in Vermont, and then great food and all these rich kids and people around him. And you think, 28 days, he's going to be right as rain. And clearly that's not the case. And then at some point, I think we had him in a place that was just going to batter him. And we were told, the best thing you can do is to completely destroy his self-confidence, and then we will rebuild it. Whereas if you know anything about addiction, it's that addicts, first and foremost, whatever they're addicted to, use it to cover up their own self-hatred that grows. The more they use, the more they dislike themselves. And so to numb that pain, they use again. And then there's also the biological addiction element of it. So it's a vicious circle for them.
You brought up something there that I think is important too, and you guys can tell me if you covered it in the interview, because I don't remember you talking about this specifically, but there are different types of rehab facilities, and there are good people and bad people involved in the rehabilitation business.
Yep.
Jake, do you want to speak to that at all? I mean, for people how do I know where to go?
Yes. I mean, for me, I've honestly experienced pretty much everything in terms of, these recovery facilities. I've been, like my mom said, to the expensive high-end place, and then I've also been I also spent some time in what was called a flop house, and a flop house is basically a cover up for a halfway house that where they are basically supplying drugs to the patients in order to keep them in their program so they can just keep taking money from their insurance companies. So I've experienced all different sorts of those types of places. And for me, recovery is all about just, it's like, it's like what you said about, just acceptance, it doesn't matter if you're in a flop house or if you're in some really expensive, nice rehab. If you don't want to make the choice to recover and you're not ready, it's not gonna, it doesn't matter where you are.
So Jake, is there a resource, a website, a search that you can do to direct people who are looking and don't want to go through some of the process that you had to go through to go to tough places that weren't right?
Yeah. In my experience, there are a lot of terrible, programs out there. Ones that, they almost set themselves up as more of like a business where they see patients as more of like a number. At least from my experience, this is what I saw. And for me, the places that, are the best at actually helping people are the ones that are set up by people who are either sober addicts or ones that have been affected by addiction.
Sure.
So I had a friend, her name is Emily Cooley, and she passed away a number of years ago now. When she passed away, her mother set up this program. It's technically an addiction resources center in which, they have a number, you call them and they will find the best place to actually help you.
It's amazing.
Places that actually want to help you rather than, like I said, see you as just another number. It's called this center is called M's Angels, and they do a lot of good work. They've helped a number of my friends now.
Fastest way to get to them is what? Social media?
Yeah, social media. You can find them on Facebook. Just type in M's Angels and they'll pop right up.
And there is a phone number that I can share with you as well for them.
Sure.
It's
Mhm.
419-706-9272. 419-706-9272. Here's one of the things she says on her Facebook page. People need to be encouraged. People need to be reminded of how wonderful they are. People need to be believed in, told they are brave and smart and capable of accomplishing all the dreams they dream and more. Remind each other of this. And I really, it sounds a little Hallmark cardy, but it actually is, to me, at the center of years of discovery of trying to figure out how to help my son. That encapsulates exactly what I finally came to realize, is that when you bash them, when you tell them how bad they are, or try to make them feel badly about themselves, thinking that at some point you can rebuild them, you're doing more damage than you are good. You need to remind, and Jake, I think you know this truly, you need to be reminded, and you need to remind yourself on a daily basis that you are good and beautiful and that you have a life worth living in a vibrant, passionate way. And I think that speaks to that.
Yep. I 100% agree. And I think that's any addict out there that's suffering, they need to learn to love themselves, because there's a place for everyone in this beautiful world, there really is. And, if you just accept, that the world is the way it is, and that you learn to love yourself, anyone can recover,
Yep.
Yeah.
That's my belief.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think you're proof of it. I want to play this brief interview I did with my brother. Again, he has special needs and he has a speech impediment. And the answers are short, not because of the speech defect, but because he and I grew up in an environment where we weren't actually encouraged to talk about our feelings all that much. There weren't a lot of evenings where he said, let's just get it all out.
Yeah. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, it was kind of the reverse. Stuff that down and don't talk about it. He has an unbelievable heart. Everybody loves him. And the amazing thing, there's a town in upstate New York called Ithaca, New York, where we grew up. Cornell University is based there, where people would know where it is. And it's a nice little town to grow up. But the area we grew up in were a lot of hardworking blue collar folks who worked all week and drank all weekend. And he was a part of that. And it got out of control very quickly. So what you're going to hear here are his short answers, but some answers that really surprised me because it's stuff he and I hadn't talked about before. And I asked him ahead of time if it was okay if we talked about him. And if he was willing to do this, he did. I couldn't be more proud of him. And if you listen at the end, you'll hear his mantra, what he says about his life all the time. And I think it's really motivating. And I think, Jake, you probably feel the same way. So Again, this is Mickey Cochran sitting down with me talking about a lifetime of addiction and the celebration we just had the other day because he's been sober for 18 years. Give it a listen.
The Deep Six.
I'm talking to my brother, Mickey Cochran. Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome, brother. I love you.
I love you as well. And I think you're an inspiration to people, but we need to talk about some tough stuff first, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Both our parents were heavy drinkers.
Yeah.
Our father was an abusive alcoholic. We were surrounded by abusive alcoholics.
Yeah,
so it was
alcohol.
tough. Having said that, when you were a kid, our parents both had this thing about, well, if they're drinking at home, that's better than if they're just going somewhere else and drinking. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
So how did you get beer to drink when you were 14 years old?
It didn't get to me sometimes.
Our parents did.
Yeah.
Or our uncles.
Uncle too sometimes.
And you drank until you got drunk pretty much every time you drank.
Yeah,
Right?
I get drunk.
Yeah. And that led to you becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah, that's right. Alcoholic.
Do you remember much from the time that you were in your 20s and 30s? Or is it a lot of blackouts, or do you remember stuff that was
A lot
good?
of blackouts, get sick. Sometimes I want to quit, but I can't. Get up with the shakes every morning.
It wasn't good.
It wasn't good.
And do you remember why you wanted to drink in the beginning?
Like everybody else.
You wanted people to like you, and you wanted people to accept you?
I want to be like everybody else.
Right. You wanted to
Cool. I want to be cool.
Yeah, you want to be a part of the group, right?
Yeah.
And once it got bad and got out of hand, you didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
You got in trouble with the law as well.
Yeah. Went to jail with DWI.
Yeah, and that was for violating probation.
Yeah, violating probation.
Do you remember your first night in jail?
Yeah, I went court. Judge Sweetland, 46 months. I went court drunk.
Yeah, went to court drunk, and you went to jail.
Yeah.
And your first night in jail, I know you got sick because, relatively quickly, because you were
Coming down from alcohol.
going through withdrawal.
They take me to the hospital that night. I had bad seizure.
From the jail,
Yeah.
and then they brought you back to the jail.
Yeah.
How many times did they do that?
One time.
So you're in jail, you're taken to the hospital because you're sick, you come back, and yet after 4 months, the minute you got out of jail,
Went down to the shanty.
and what is a shanty for people that don't know?
Went in
It's a bar,
Killer Street. Went on the corner of Killer Street and State Street.
and it was one of your favorite bars, right?
That was my favorite bar in Ithaca.
And you got drunk again,
Yeah.
right back to where it was. So
Yeah.
from getting sober, you wiped all that out, you're right back to being a full-fledged alcoholic.
Yeah.
That lasted for several more years.
Yeah.
You ended up homeless.
Homeless and
and we ended up not talking to each other for a long
I
time
remember that.
because I didn't want you around the kids because
I
I
know.
saw the damage that happened to us.
Yeah.
So I was really scared for you, and I didn't know how to help you.
I know.
But I knew that I couldn't yell at you enough,
Yeah.
love you enough, give you enough money, buy you. You remember all the stupid stuff I did? I used to buy you beer
I know.
because then at least I thought I'd keep an eye on you that way.
Yeah.
And it didn't help.
No.
The only person that could stop drinking is you
Yeah. Myself.
because you were the one with the problem.
Yeah.
I know you tried to stop several times. You went through treatment several times.
Yeah.
And you always went back to it. What was your worst day as a drunk?
Every day I had a shakes, dry heaves.
So you get out and you're still messed up, and you get to be the age of about 45, I guess.
About 45. Yeah.
And it's New Year's Eve 2003, New Year's Day 2004, and you decided you were done drinking. Why?
Almost I died from it. Almost I died. I want to quit drinking. No more sick.
So you wanted to live.
Yeah. I want to live.
And why did you want to live? Why did you make that decision?
I can come here to see you guys and stuff.
Right?
You miss family. I'm happy to come. I got family now. You, Maureen, and Abigail, and Isaac, and Amy, and Ross, and Lauren, and your mother too.
And but you were tired of being sick,
Yeah, I thought of being sick every day.
and you wanted to live, and now you've been sober for 18 years.
18 years. Someday I can't eat when I was coming up, but sometimes I can't eat. A couple days I can't eat. Just drink.
So you wouldn't eat anything, you just drink.
Just drink.
What's the most you drank in one day? Most beers? About, I mean, I know you
About
don't,
18 probably.
maybe
then-
more.
Probably. Then me only go to treatment.
So why do you think our uncles wanted to get you drunk?
Don't know. Didn't get drunk every day.
And sometimes you drive even though you didn't have a driver's license.
Yeah.
I mean, you're lucky you didn't kill anybody.
I know. I'm looking at anybody.
So you get sober on New Year's Day, 2004. We get back together as a family. It's
Yeah.
been amazing. And all the people you pissed off, the cops that arrested you, all those people now are your friends again.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's crazy.
What do you think that says about you as a person? You must be a likable guy.
I like a big guy. I like this new life.
So in the last 18 years that you've been sober, you've helped a lot of other people in AA. You've sponsored some people, right?
Yeah.
So what do you tell people who, are new to the program or trying to quit drinking?
Go to AA. It works.
And how do you cheer them on? What do you say to them?
Show them my coin and stuff.
And when they don't want to stick with it, what do you say?
It's your problem.
Because they have to fix themselves,
Yeah.
right?
They fixed it. Yep.
Is that the ultimate truth, that people can't fix it for you?
Yep.
You got to decide to live yourself?
Yep.
I know us getting back together as a family is the greatest thing for me.
It's great. For me too.
Is that the greatest thing for you, to be back together with family?
Yep.
And you've worked regularly until recently when everybody wasn't working much, but you may work again.
Yep.
You've always been a hard worker. You care about other people.
I do care about people now.
When you were drinking a lot, I didn't think you liked yourself very much.
I didn't.
How do you feel about yourself now?
I feel great about myself.
And how do you feel about your life now?
I like my new life.
You like it?
Yep. Love it.
You love your new life?
Yep. I love my new life.
And what was the best day in the last 18 years since you got sober?
I got friends in Ithaca. I got friends out here. I got you for brother, my sister-in-law, your mother, and I got Kevin Chills and John Hagan, Steve Miller, and everybody in Ken out here, and Peggy in Michigan, and everybody.
And it seems like, everybody has something that makes them happy. What I see in you, what I'm really proud of this in you, is the one thing that makes you happiest is when you're doing something for other people.
You make me happy.
You're a good man, you know that.
I know, you're a good brother.
I don't think you knew you were a good man, but I hope you know it now.
I know it now.
You make the world a better place.
I do.
Well, thanks for doing this, brother.
You're welcome. I love you. Sister-in-law, I love you, brother.
Love you too. And one more time, how do you feel about your life?
I love my new life. I love it.
The Deep Six.
Oh man. It really gets to me when you hear something like that. And I think, all three of us share that, but I think anybody listening, really, if you know anything about addiction, you really know it's a simple statement. I love my new life. His new life, by the way, 18 years on,
Yep.
still feels like a new life to him. And what a beautiful thing. It is to find recovery and then to find joy in recovery is a very special thing. Jake,
And
what
one of
did
his greatest joys is helping other people, Jake. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you guys have
Yeah.
a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
Do you
Yep.
do you see that? I mean, you're a little newer into your recovery, although pretty good.
Yeah.
What are you? You're now.
Well, what he said really resonated with me in the sense that, I think, finding joy, after recovery and recovery itself are kind of one and the same thing, and it's not, a overnight quick process. It's something you'll be doing for the rest of your life in recovery, you have to, you find joy and you find ways to kind of, whatever your own version of success are. And, I think, you can really hear that within his interview. You can see how, over the course of these past 18 years, he's been able to find that life, that life where he's happy. He doesn't need the alcohol.
Right.
He doesn't need anything besides
Joy.
what life gives him,
Right. And he gets up every day, disability aside. I sure wish I had this. He gets up every day and he just tries to be happy.
Yeah.
All he wants to do is be happy. And all he wants to do is try to make other people around him happy. That's his
That's
whole thing.
beautiful. That right there is recovery.
All right. So I want to get to what you guys did, because I was really, I've said this before, but I was really blown away by it. It's amazing when a family can get together in private and talk about difficulties when you're on the other side and you've got somebody you love who's made it to the other side and they're sober. You guys are doing it on a podcast with a lot of people listening. So is there anything you want to say that we haven't said yet, either one of you, before we roll this tape?
Mom?
Go ahead, sweetheart.
No, go ahead. I was saying, do you have anything to say?
Oh,
Okay. Sorry.
I think that it's important to point out that even being able to talk about it, this is all a learning process. This was hard won, but man, it is incredibly valuable. And I do think that having that conversation, for us, because this is what Steve and I do for a living, is we talk. But talking it doesn't matter if you're talking into a microphone or if you are looking across the table at someone you love, exploring what happened and the evolution of that and how you each felt and where you began, what happened in the middle, and where you are headed is such a valuable process, and not just for the addict, but for those of us who love and live around them. Man, to be able to sort of get that out. I learn every time we speak, Jake. I learn from you, and I hope that my journey through this has been I know you've been patient with me and you've been loving with me about it. And I hope that it is in some way helpful to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I feel that, recovery is it's an evolutionary kind of process in that, in addiction, you affect the ones you love almost more than you affect yourself in a lot of ways, So you almost have to have like some sort, some patience when coming out of, the throes of addiction. You have to understand that you hurt the ones you love. And, I feel that, we're at a point now, Mom, where, we're past it all and we can kind of, look at it in a light that is beneficial to others and ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
It's a great, healthy and beautiful way to look at it. I think you're going to be just as amazed as I am with this conversation. It's Patty and Jake talking about his and their past, present, and future. Listen to this.
There have been over 1 million overdose deaths in the past 10 years because of addiction in this country, and over 100,000 in the last year alone. And that, believe it or not, is a new record. I think what do you think? I believe the pandemic really contributed.
Definitely.
Because, we've talked about this before. Everybody needs to be soothed. That's kind of what addiction is all about. And sometimes we're addicted to exercise or sex or shopping, food, alcohol. And sometimes we're addicted to things that can kill us even faster, such as opiates, which was something that you kind of fell into when you were 20 years old.
Actually, a little younger. I was.
Not that I knew.
Yeah, I was 17 when I first tried it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. What got you into it?
As a kid, I just struggled with my self-image. I went to a private Catholic high school for the first 2 years.
As a Jewish kid. Right.
Exactly.
Which probably didn't make you feel too great about yourself.
And honestly, I just didn't fit in. And, I wasn't an athlete, I was, a small guy and I considered myself an intellectual. So it with the general vibe of how that school was.
It was all about sports. I know.
Exactly. So I just never fit in there. So, when I left that school and I went to Montclair High, and let me say this, that school was also an all male, private school. I had never had any interaction with females really.
Well, you did.
Besides friends.
There was an interim in between the Catholic school and the high school in which you went to a a boarding
school.
school in Northern California
Yes,
that
that's true.
kind of took you all over the world,
Yeah.
different places.
Mhm, mhm.
But it was tiny.
It was
So
tiny. Yeah.
There was like almost no girls there.
There
right?
was like one girl actually. Yeah. So it didn't
One
really,
girl. Lucky chick.
yeah, exactly. So it wasn't, I just had no interaction with the world basically at that point. So when I went to this large public school, I believe my senior year,
Mhm.
within weeks, this very pretty blonde girl had kind of swept me off my feet. And as someone who had such bad self-image problems, I just fell in deep into the culture that she had surrounded herself with at that
It's
point.
kind of interesting. And I think that we all go through this, that when we feel insecure
Mhm.
and someone we're attracted to is attracted to us,
It makes you feel like the man
you like the or like the woman.
or like the woman.
Been
Exactly.
there too.
Yeah, exactly.
And what happens is you just got to follow the lead,
Mhm.
because you're not going to say, wait a minute, I don't know about this, because you just feel blessed that this person is, and it's not correct, but we all go through that. Not all of us, but
Mhm.
a lot of us go through that. And for you, the problem is that she had some
Mhm.
issues that
Yeah.
were not something you were able to deal with effectively at the age of 17.
Exactly. She had been a heroin addict since the age of 15 and when I met her at 17, she was deep in it at that point, and she was a hippie. She was someone who was very fun loving and, artistic. She read, literature such as, by authors such as Jack Kerouac, and listened to Elliott Smith and all these people that, as someone who was incredibly sheltered for most of his childhood, it kind of, it
It's
was
exciting.
appealing. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was
Yeah.
exciting and appealing. And I wanted to be that, I wanted to be a Jack Kerouac at that point. And she, when she finally said, brought it to my attention that she was doing this drug, and, it felt like it was just part of who I was becoming.
Right.
So I immediately
genre.
jumped in.
Yeah.
I'd never tried a drug in my life at that point. And the first time I ever had done a drug was heroin.
Jeez.
So, it was a life altering experience for me at that point.
How did it make you feel?
It made me feel like a different person. Like, I had always, like I said, I always had been very, I'd had low self-esteem. And when I tried that drug, it made me feel like the man. It made me feel like, just like she was in a way a drug for me as well. It just kind of, how do I put it, was another, just another step in that direction for me.
Right. It just made you feel like you could do anything.
Exactly.
You could get her,
Mhm.
you could do this, and you were,
Mhm.
everything you dreamed about was possible.
Yep. And I'll bring it back to you talking about soothing.
Uh-huh.
I had been I had a lot of issues as a kid, and it soothed me. It
Yeah.
made me feel like the man I wanted to be, not the child that I was.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It put you into a world that you didn't know your way around until you tried that. And it,
Mhm.
yeah.
Exactly. And I fell in deep. At one point, she even left my life, and I was so ingrained in this lifestyle
Mhm.
that it was just hard for me to get out of at that point. I was incredibly addicted. I was probably spending $200 to $300 a day on the drug.
Really?
Yeah.
Where were you getting that
mostly
kind
your
of money?
Yeah. Mostly money I'd steal from my mother here and my father.
No, I know you borrowed some jewelry and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I was,
Yeah.
it turned me into a terrible person in my, I hate to put it that way because,
Well, here's the thing that I learned, and it took me a long time to learn this, because at first, when I saw this evolving in you, and honestly, I didn't see it when you were 17. I didn't see it until after you'd left for college and then were falling apart there. I did think in some ways that, oh my God, he's turned into a terrible person, just like you thought.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I really began to kind of study everything and understand the illness
Mhm.
and how it impacts people, and literally saw MRIs of brains
Mhm.
on drugs and off drugs, that I understood the incredible biological impact
Mhm.
this shit has on you.
Yep.
And I think that for anybody dealing with it, you need to separate the person from the illness. And it doesn't mean that you enable them in any way. It simply means that you say, wait a minute, because that's, I think for me, what I finally realized. It took what, 3 years?
Longer.
2, 3, well, but until I finally
Oh.
began to see what
Mhm.
was going on,
Mhm.
till I was able to say, oh my God, this is this beautiful person. And the more I beat him up about who he is, the less able he is to get a hold of himself and say, I'm more valuable than this.
Mhm.
And I need to fight this and heal myself.
Mhm.
Because I think we all, certainly as a parent, but even if you have a spouse or somebody you love, a friend, whatever, you want to fix it. A lot of us do. We want to sort of
Yeah.
just take you under our wing and make it right by finding the right doctor or the right
Mhm.
rehab or the right whatever.
Mhm.
And at some point, you just have to realize that you have to let this person feel loved and loving, and back off.
Mhm.
You know,
And recovery is a process. It's
Yeah.
what I had tried going down the road of recovery multiple times and failed multiple times.
multiple rehabs.
Multiple rehabs. And the fact of the matter was, once you're in that deep, it's hard to let go. And some people just aren't ready. When family wants them to be ready, you can't force it to happen. It has to be something that they kind of, want on their own. Otherwise it will never work. It doesn't matter if you send them to a $60,000 rehab where your roommate is John Hamm. It just doesn't matter. They have to want it.
Well, that's the thing. And I think that the more you, at least this is where I got in my journey through this, is that the more you try to fix it, the more the person tries to fight you. So they're not focused on helping themselves. They're focused on fighting you, on not doing what you want them to do, on trying to avoid at all costs the plan you have in place, because you just need at some point to be able to make your own plan. And I think that was a difficult and valuable lesson. I mean,
Definitely.
it was weird for me because this all started exactly as I was going through breast cancer. So I'm like trying to figure out how to save my son while I'm trying to figure out how to save myself. And I always tell people, I'm so grateful that breast cancer happened then for me, because it didn't seem nearly as upsetting and dangerous to me as what you were going through, because I did know that I was treatable and that I had great doctors. And so I could kind of put that in their hands. But it took me a while to understand the same thing for what you were going through, that I needed to just let go and know that the most important thing was that you learn to not only love yourself, but believe that you had a future that didn't involve just looking for the next needle in your arm.
And it took me a while, but I do believe that once you made that choice, it pushed me, in a way. It's like it's counterintuitive, you would think, but when you let go like that, it helps the person to kind of go down the road themselves of trying to figure it out. And don't get me wrong, I had a couple people that I met in recovery that really helped me.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Specifically the process up in New Hampshire. They were, I met a couple guys there that owned the business, the recovery center, and they were 20 years sober themselves. And, they really showed me that, just because you're an addict doesn't mean that this is going to be your life, know?
Right.
And that's what made me realize, I want more out of life. And it still took me some time after that, but eventually I just made the choice for myself. There wasn't any last, program that I went through that what gave me the aha moment. It was just me sitting there feeling like garbage on the floor of a bathroom somewhere, saying to myself, you know what? I want more than this.
And deserve more than this.
Exactly.
I think that when you stopped having to battle me and dad and other people in your life, when it became your own battle for your life, because I remember you saying to me, probably a couple years after you were sober, I remember you saying to me, what I finally realized is I could either, pursue this needle, or I could go back to school, because you're an incredible academic. You're a brilliant guy. I could have children. I could fall in love with someone that is worthy of me, and who, she's worthy of you. You could travel. I know you love travel. There's so many things that you wanted to do in life that severe of a opiate addiction wouldn't allow you to do. And it just suddenly you realized the value of your own life.
Exactly.
In fairness, not everybody maybe has those things that they can pursue. Maybe they aren't academic, or maybe they aren't able or want to travel, but everybody has something to be passionate about, and they can find it.
Exactly. And for a lot of people that can manifest in AA or even NA, because a lot of people find their community within those groups and they stick with it. They get sober, and then it becomes their life in a sense that they want to just help people.
Right.
And they help other newcomers coming in. And, for the majority of addicts, that can be the path to salvation.
Yeah.
It wasn't for me. I have to say that. For me, it was my drive to succeed and my drive to do something better with, something valuable with my life.
With this time that you're given here.
Yeah. I mean, I felt myself getting older while going through this. At one point I was, 23 years old, still with barely 2 semesters of college under my belt. And I was like, you know what, this is not what I want. I want to do more. I want to go see beautiful places. I want nice things. I'm a huge car guy. I wanted, to own a nice car.
Right.
There are so many goals that I had for myself that I realized were never going to happen.
As long as that was where your attention and money and health was going.
Exactly.
It's interesting. I remember when you were very, very early in recovery, we talked about you going back to school, and you were scared.
I was.
You were really scared about it.
I really was. I mean, for someone who had just gone through that and struggled to get out of it, I just didn't know if I could even handle it. I mean, that was an issue that I had even in my childhood. I never felt like I was good enough, for anything, to do anything.
Why do you think that is?
Honestly, I've thought about that a lot recently, and I honestly don't know. I think some of it has to do with, just who I am. Like I'm an emotional person, sensitive person, and I see how strong some people are, and and I think I felt like a little fish in a big world. You know what I mean? Kind of like where I just felt like there's no way I could be successful. I look at you and I look at Dad and I see how successful you guys were, and it felt like so much to live up to, and so so hard for me to actually get somewhere. Like I just felt like I wasn't good enough. It's
so amazing to me, because you say that, and yet you're like this brilliant, sensitive, you're so many things above and beyond what either of us are. And that is sort of interesting to me, that you never felt enough. It's
Mhm.
funny you say that though, because maybe it's a little genetic, because I grew up in a family with, super achieving dad, super achieving brothers. And I never felt like I could, I could measure up to them, either academically or personally on so many levels. So, and I've done fine, but it's funny that there are some people who start with, who have nothing and accept this incredible belief in themselves
Mhm.
and have this ability to move beyond those in those insecurities or
Mhm.
those places in their life where they feel like they're not exactly
Yeah.
who they should be or what they should be. And then there are folks like us who never feel good enough, who never feel smart enough or
Mhm.
accomplished enough. And wow.
It doesn't even matter how good, how good you
Right.
can be at something. If you
Yeah.
have that kind of feeling about yourself,
Yeah.
it will stop you dead in your tracks. Like I had never really even tried to accomplish anything before. And once, what really made me realize that, I can do this
Mhm.
is when I went back to school, when I got sober and I took it seriously.
Community college.
Yeah. And I got all A's,
And fell in love with
fell in
history.
love with history, fell in love with literature, and, transferred to a great school. And, as I've been able to accomplish more and more, I've started to see that, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can be the person that I want to be.
Straight A's, University of Colorado.
Exactly. And, there's still a lot that I have to learn. Every year is, I feel myself, kind of heading further and further down the path to becoming, whatever the generic form of a successful person would be.
Right.
I feel myself getting, kind of heading down that path, and it's kind of, it's like almost, it's like a, how do I put it? It's like a breath of fresh air in a way, because it's becoming easier,
Mhm.
because the more I accomplish, the more I feel I can accomplish. And I feel like that was huge for me, that was a huge lesson for me fresh out of recovery.
Mhm.
I didn't even think I could handle community college, so I think that's where a lot of my, like when I first started down the road of addiction, I think, it's kind of what led me to that point. I just wanted to be something. And I felt maybe that something was being a heroin addict. I
Right.
literally remember telling myself as a heroin addict when I was deep in addiction that heroin was the love of my life and this was going to be it.
Isn't there some music or some song about?
I'm sure. I mean,
I thought I remembered you telling me some song where this guy sang about addiction and how it was something that was like a love for him.
well, there's an Elliott Smith song, I believe,
I think that's, yeah.
that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. But there's a couple artists who have written about it because it's,
In a romantic almost sense.
exactly.
Yeah. Here's a tough question. And don't worry about me being your mom.
Mhm.
Do you ever feel a moment where you feel compelled to go back to that?
Yeah. I mean, when I'm at the hardest, like when let's say I have a huge exam or a big paper that I have to do,
Mhm.
I'll sit there and I'll feel like, what will just make me forget about all of this tension and stress to succeed,
Mhm.
would be using,
Yeah.
because the moment you use, you feel
So something that simple, a
exactly.
test. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Anything stressful in life, for me at least, can bring me right back to it.
How do you fight it?
By just thinking about where it will actually take me. You romanticize it in your head, like
Mhm.
the high, the feeling,
Mhm.
all of it. But the reality of it is that when you do, make that decision in those moments, all it leads to is failure.
Yeah.
That's just the fact of the matter.
Mhm.
If I chose to use before some huge exam or, before I go to work, it's not going to work out. There's no chance
It's
of
gotta
me.
be hard to do. Because I mean, in my own life, like I get depressed or I feel a little lost.
Mm.
So for me, you know, I might take I might want French fries.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I don't always know how to say no.
Yeah.
I might want a shot of great bourbon because it just
Yeah.
takes away.
100%. I
And
get that.
it's not easy.
It's not. And you know, for me,
And I know how much greater the addiction to something like
Exactly.
heroin is than it is to French
oh,
fries.
it's like, you
I
know,
can't
rubbing
even-
elbows with God. And I hate to put it like that,
No, it's an
but that's what the
interesting.
feeling was for me.
Uh-huh.
It just, I don't even know. I don't want to romanticize it too much because in AA they say it's not good to do that.
Right.
But it's like stepping into another world,
Yeah.
you know.
But the problem is stepping out of that
Exactly.
world.
You're also stepping out of the real world.
And
Yeah.
and trying to step out of that
Mhm.
fake world.
Exactly. For me, what I did to kind of in those moments soothe myself instead of going to something like that,
Mhm.
I found other passions. You know, I gained hobbies. You know, I got a car that I really loved, and I whip it around in the canyons in Colorado when I'm feeling like garbage.
Yeah.
Or I'll pull up a video game, or I'll read a great book. You know, I found hobbies and things that I love that in a way at this point soothe me more than that
Are you
drug
a-
really ever did.
Are you aware that that's what you're fighting when you do that?
Yes. Yeah, I make
Wow.
that choice. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's got to take unbelievable strength.
In the beginning, yes, but as you keep kind of going down the path, as I like to call it,
Mhm.
it becomes easier and easier because you know you think as you succeed more and you know you gain people that you love in life and relationships. You don't
Mhm.
want any of that to disappear,
Right.
and so it kind of starts to become a bad memory in a way. It's like, you know, you think about using, and for me, the first thought that goes to my head at this point is, oh, well, then there will be me in a month sitting on the side of the road with all my stuff because I got kicked out of my apartment for, you know,
Yeah.
leaving the stove on because I was, you know, too high to even turn it off after I cooked something. You know,
Yeah.
I think about all of the terrible things that can happen,
Uh-huh.
and it's put a bad taste in my mouth or in my head rather, in terms of you know, how I feel about the drug. I personally would never go back to it.
Mhm.
And that's where people have to get.
Yeah.
That's where other addicts have to get to that point. You know, that's the hard part. When you say it, you know, you try to force the people you love to get sober.
Mhm.
That's why it doesn't work,
Right.
because they haven't gone
It has to be
through
you.
Exactly. They have to go through all the terrible stuff that addiction brings. And then it shows them that instant gratification that you get from using is just not worth it, because, you know, life continues on. You know, you're high for what, a couple hours,
Mhm.
and then you're sitting there feeling like garbage and you didn't get anything done and your mind's in a
And you hate
jumble.
yourself because you've fallen back into the trap.
Exactly. And it's hard to stop. You know, for me, I used constantly. There was a 6-month period, probably there was a 6-month period where I would use like constantly, where I was high 24/7, wake up, use, middle of the day, you know, grab
Just
the
kept going
needle,
back. Yeah.
you know, end of the night, use, you know, it was just never ending.
How many times did you overdose that you remember?
I think like 4. I overdosed quite a lot, and I should be dead. I mean, to be honest with you, that's
I
the
can
fact of the
remember
matter.
the police arriving at the house at midnight one night when
Mhm.
they'd found you in a drugstore bathroom.
That was the last time I overdosed, and that was probably the worst time, and one of the main catalysts for me moving in the direction of sobriety.
Mhm.
You know, because I think about that moment where I had walked into that bathroom at 4 p.m. in the afternoon and said, okay, I just bought some new stuff I'm going to use. Put the needle in my arm. Don't remember a thing after that.
Hmm.
And then at 11 p.m., I wake up in the ambulance.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, I was dead when they found me. My heart
Yeah, they
was
told me
not
that-
beating.
Yeah.
So for that, what's that mean? That means for 5 or 6 hours, I was sitting there in that bathroom, and I could have died at
Spiraling down.
any moment.
Yeah.
I could have died. And for some reason, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And that told me I have a reason to be alive.
Well, it's interesting because I remember the police told me that the only reason they even found you was the drugstore was closing, and they just happened to go check the bathroom door before they left and noticed that it was locked, and they knocked on the door and no one answered. And so they decided to call the police. But
Yeah.
had they bypassed that and just left, or
I would be
if they
dead.
were an all-night drugstore
Mhm.
until somebody was going to use it, you probably would. And they told me they broke the door down and they had to give you a more than one dose of Narcan to try to bring you around.
To me, that's a miracle. I see my survival of that moment as a miracle because, I used it 4:00 in the afternoon. Like, how does
Right.
someone survive?
Well, you probably don't remember it, but maybe came around and used again
I honestly have no idea.
because they found all the implements there.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, like have you been through any moments when you felt so incredibly down that you felt more compelled than other times to lean in that direction? Or is it just this, I always tell you it's this thing, like I know when I was going through cancer, I had this thing, I had all these affirmations on my phone, and I did it because it's the old adage of, I tell you for the next 10 minutes or 10 seconds rather, don't think about elephants. All you can think about is elephants unless you replace it with something else. And what I would do is, if you sit there and instead of elephants, you think about dogs, cats, turkeys, chickens, pigs, whatever, it drives the elephants out of your head. And for me, fear of being ill, or honestly, I used it too when I was frightened for you, was to grab those affirmations on my phone and read through this, just statements about myself, quotes, poetry, all kinds of things that raised my spirits. How did you fight off that compulsion, especially early on?
Early on, it's almost like riding a bike, how I think about it, learning to ride a bike. You need training. In a way, you need training, just to, be able to get through those moments.
What was in your head? What did you think about in order to pull yourself off of that?
In the beginning, it was, I didn't want to, disappoint the people I loved. I thought about you, and you were still going through your craziness at the time. And I thought about Will and Katie and, everyone I love in my life. Yeah. And it just pushed me to not head back down that path. And it also pushed me to, start to figure out other ways of getting through those moments. And that's where I bring in, just having a general love for life, going on
Loving
hikes.
yourself and figuring.
Yeah.
where you wanted to
Nature,
be.
that would be the one I'd say. In the beginning, nature was huge for me.
Yeah.
Just walking through the
That's
woods,
for me too.
just really would calm me down and kind of distract me from, in those moments, from making bad decisions.
A little forest bathing.
And yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, it's not something that happens overnight. People like to say, like to think, oh, he's sober now, he's good, 100%. No, there were moments, honestly, even after I got sober where I used once, maybe twice. But, it's like, I was a work in progress. I like to say at that point. And even those moments were incredibly, they taught me a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say valuable because
They were valuable because when I did use those,
you didn't
one
hate
or two
yourself. You
times,
just said, okay,
yeah, I was like, what the
this
hell
is
am I
not-
doing?
this isn't me.
Yeah, this is not me.
Yeah.
This is not who I want to be anymore. And, I haven't touched it since then,
Right.
and I know what would happen if I did,
Right.
So I think you start to kind of develop this kind of like, for me, I hate it. It's weird to say it like that, but I hate the drug, and I hate, I almost don't like I almost like to not think about that part of my life. I try to, and I know that's maybe a lot of people would say that's not the right thing to do. A lot of people in AA and NA, but for me, I just had to just focus on things that would take me past that and kind of help me develop as a person. And that really helped.
It's interesting because I think, and I felt the same way about cancer, and truthfully the same way about my child, is not allowing these illnesses to define us.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you're not aware. It doesn't mean that you're not vigilant.
Mhm.
It just means it's not who you are.
Exactly.
And I
Mhm.
think it's important to know that, because I think that is how you love and respect yourself.
Mhm.
You don't let this thing own you.
Mhm.
You do what you need to do to be better and to take care of yourself, but you don't let it define who you are.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Yep, exactly. And I was tired of it defining who I am. It had defined my life for 4 or 5 years by the end of it. And I saw Katie, doing well in school and getting through and
Mhm.
getting ready to start her life. And
Mhm.
I saw Will heading into college, and I was just like, I sometimes a little bit of how do I put it? Desire, I guess, and even competition in a way.
Yeah, envy.
Envy. I didn't
You were
want to be.
envious of the right thing.
Yeah. And as someone who loves history,
Mhm.
I didn't want to be just some name that no one remembers in 50
Yeah.
years. Someone who says, "Oh yeah, that was your uncle who died of a heroin overdose." I didn't want to be that. I wanted more. And maybe that makes me different from some addicts, because there are a lot of people that they're okay not accomplishing much. They're okay just being,
Defining themselves through it.
yeah, exactly.
That was
And
my uncle. I mean, I had an uncle I adored. He was handsome and brilliant, great piano player. He was worked in Wall Street, but he could never get past his addictions.
Mhm.
And by the time he was 47, he looked like he was 80 years old, and he was gone.
Mhm.
And it defined him within our family, and it defined him for himself. And it was heartbreaking, because he was such a beautiful, intelligent, lovely person who had this illness that, he never either was given the tools or never felt the compulsion to battle.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a heartbreak, that's for sure.
It is, and there's some people that some people kind of, what they do is they, especially in AA, they like to say that, you can still define yourself as an addict,
Mhm.
as long as, you don't do the drug, and you define yourself as an addict who wants to help other addicts. There are plenty of people that stay in AA their whole lives and then, work at treatment centers and.
Sure, I guess it's about not seeing yourself as
Mhm.
a loser.
Exactly.
Addict. So
Yes, exactly.
that's the different.
Mhm.
You can be aware of the fact that this is,
Mm.
it just, again, somebody like me who likes to eat like French fries, potato chips, other things like that. I'm aware that there's a compulsion there, and while I don't let it define how I see myself, it is something you have to be aware of, and you have to say, okay, put it down.
Mhm.
Don't allow yourself
Yeah.
access or whatever it is. It's interesting to me, because I never really understood addiction, other than watching what it did to my uncle. But again, we grew up in a time and a place where we all loved him, but he was my drunk uncle.
Yeah.
He would be at Christmas parties. He would come to our house up in the mountains, and it was always my mother. It was his big sister was always trying to keep him away from the bars and that kind of thing. So that's how we defined him in our heads. And I remember you had gone to a really shitty rehab down in near Palm Beach, down in the area down there. And you got out of there by your own luck. And then you were in a couple of different halfway houses. And one of them was really terrific. And was related to the one up in New Hampshire that you also went to.
Sobriety Now.
Yeah, they were just wonderful. And in a little tiny kind of nondescript place, but boy, they were really wonderful. But I remember visiting you there, and you and I went to it would be a Narconon meeting.
Al-Anon.
Al-Anon? Okay, because it was mostly
Maybe it was Narconon. I honestly can't quite remember.
Yeah, it was like 11 o'clock on this rainy night. And we went in there. And, again, in my head, people that were addicts were different than the rest of us. And I started listening to them stand up and tell their stories. And it just like overwhelmed me what I was hearing from all these mostly very young people. And afterwards, I went up to this guy who had been in tears talking about how grateful he was that he was 3 months sober. And he talked about this battle. And I went up to him and I went, oh my gosh, you and I are the same. And he said, I didn't think you were an addict. And I said, what you guys taught me tonight is that we are all looking to be soothed. And some of us do it with food, some with shopping, some with sex, some with exercise. We all like take something on that gives us that feeling for that moment of, okay, I can do this, or I can get through this. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that on some level, we're all that person.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're all looking for some way to do it. Some of us choose healthier ways to do it. Some of us, write, or we make music, or we do something artistic. Some of us choose things that can hurt us, and some of us choose things that can really hurt us. But that was a breakthrough for me.
I remember the meeting. It was actually an NA meeting. That's what it was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Narcotics Anonymous.
Yeah, because Narconon is, technically Al-Anon and Narconon, I
or
believe,
for families or
families.
friends.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it was
Narcotics Anonymous. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But that was like I don't know if what you thought, but for me, that was the beginning of the breakthrough for me of understanding what this is all about. And I know it was months later, and I think you had some other issues post that. I think you overdosed a couple of times post that meeting.
Definitely.
But it was the beginning of me sort of beginning to understand, that you were still the same beautiful, incredible, intelligent, sensitive, tiny boy and then grown man that I knew. And I needed to separate you from the illness and not define you by it. And and it took more time for me, and it took more time for you. But I think that was that was an incredibly valuable meeting for me. And I'm really grateful that I went there that night.
Yeah. And, my addiction in a lot of ways still manifests, it's kind of similar to what they teach in, in everything from rehabs to AA. They say that it's a mental illness and that you'll always be an addict. And in a lot of ways, it still manifests even today, cookies. Yes. For me, it's cookies. Or sometimes I'll sit there and I'll play video games for 5 hours straight. And that, and that's, to me, that's okay, because as an addict, there's always going to be ways that I can improve. It's a constant battle and a constant process. It just gets easier as time goes by.
But you're still trying to soothe yourself, and you find ways to do it.
Exactly.
I used to work with a guy in radio who was a terrible addict, and that's a terrible thing to say, terrible addict, who was an addict who pulled himself, at least at that time, away from drugs. But we would go on the radio in the morning, and he'd bring in a fairly large sized mug of coffee. And his thing every morning was to put 17 packets of sugar in every big cup of coffee. So maybe it was a coffee mug that was like twice the size, but it was like, you'd sit there and go, man,
That's an addict
He's
for you.
Yeah, it's that need to just kind of overdo everything, whether it's eating a full bag of chips or sleeping with a bunch of people, or it's sticking a needle in your arm.
And that's why even addicts, if they can make the choice to get sober, they can be some of the most successful people too, because they have this drive and this
focus.
passion for what they're doing.
Right.
If they can find something they're passionate about.
Right. Which is you, like you love history and you just like, me, I'm a huge history fan. I can't keep up with you. You have so much knowledge that you keep gathering and you remember names and dates and places and attitudes. And it's really fascinating to me.
Yeah. And I feel every addict can have that. Everyone can go down that
Everybody
path.
can have that.
Yeah.
It's finding your passion in life.
Exactly. I have addicts. I have friends that I got sober with, that, are working, for what is it called? Like a labor, like a
factory,
it's like a
union job.
A union job. Like they're union guys, in Massachusetts. And
right.
They love their work and they're hands-on and they're helping to create these beautiful, wooden floors or their
roofs or
whatever. Exactly. And they love life, and they've found their path and what they're passionate about, and it's helped them to kind of move past all the craziness.
Right.
And in my opinion, anyone can have that. It's just finding that really, really can lead them to it. It's finding that passion,
right,
that will lead them down the path of sobriety, rather.
Because that's ultimately what soothes you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We all want to just feel like good about ourselves and what we do.
Yeah,
that's really
valuable.
Yeah, that's what everyone wants, and most of the time, that's what an addict struggles with.
Mm-hmm.
They don't feel good about themselves. They don't feel they can do anything, and they don't feel they're not good at anything anyway. So they just take the easy way out of feeling good, and that's in the instant gratification.
I don't mean to go back to this, but to me, I think that was a really huge lesson for you and for me, was that sadly there are a lot of paths to a desired sobriety that involve saying, you know what, I'm throwing you out of the house. You're not worthy of being in my presence, because you're trying to force them. And that was one of the rehabs that I chose for you in Florida, was trying to break down all feelings of self-confidence and self-worth in an effort to then tell you how to feel about yourself, which is exactly the wrong path.
Doesn't work.
It's the most important path, is to make someone feel their own self-worth and their value. And again, doesn't mean that you enable them with their use of drugs or anything that you don't put up with. But when you help someone to see their own inner worth and beauty, and when they hopefully begin to see that for themselves, that's the path, because then their life seems worth saving, not escaping.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I love you, and you're a remarkable person. And I wish I was going to be around for the rest of your life to see where it takes you, but I'll be around for a good part of it. You're not getting rid of me, but I am so grateful for everything you've taught me in life. And I am so grateful for the path you've taken and how you have made all of this work for yourself, and will continue to, I believe.
And I truly believe that too. I've hit the point where I'm like, I'm confident, I'm confident and I'm ready.
I hear it. I see it.
I'm hungry for life, and success. So, I'm very hopeful for the future, and I appreciate that, Mom. And I love you.
I love you too.
The Deep Six.
Allow me to be redundant and just say what I said before. Just completely knocked out by that. I don't know that I've ever heard a conversation on that personal level that I could feel as good about as I do about this one, because I know it's going to help people. And what I really hope is that people hear this podcast and they share it with others who they love, who are going through it, or maybe it's a neighbor that's got somebody that's going through it. Just spread the word, man. We want as many people to hear this as possible and be empowered to know that you don't have to live the life you're living that you hate being a part of. It can change.
I think
Patty?
for me, the big takeaway from this, at least in my experience, was, and again, I don't want to sound trite, but it's love. I think that when you can love this person and love yourself, which means that you're not enabling them, but you are loving them on the purest level, understanding their possibilities and where they could be headed, but also loving them enough to say, you got this, you can do this. Because really Jake, wouldn't you say that's what it boils down to? It's not a decision anybody else can make for a person.
No, not at all. I mean, we in AA and NA, we have this term called, a dry drunk, and it doesn't even matter if you haven't had a drink in a year. Recovery isn't about necessarily just being sober. It's about living your life to the fullest, and that's, through finding, joy and your own version of success, like I said.
It's funny you say that, because I have known people who are I'm not gonna say post addiction, because you're never really post addiction, but people who had been alcoholics or drug addicts who never stop hating themselves. They look at themselves as having some kind of a moral weakness. And when you said that dry drunk, it sort of meant something to me, because I always say that until you can find your way to self-love, I don't know if it's even forgiveness, but just understanding that this was an experience that brought you to this place, and that you should be proud of that. I think that's a really important takeaway. It is both as someone who loves an addict and someone who is an addict. Man, love is the most essential ingredient to healing.
Yep. I completely agree with that. And it's not even just loving yourself, it's loving the world. It's having the ability to say, this world has a lot of things that, a lot of great things to offer me as an individual. And, and the desire to take advantage of that.
And I have a lot to offer the world.
Exactly. Yeah, that too.
We're going to do a part 2 of this, if you will, and I certainly hope you'll listen as well. But I don't want you to leave this and then maybe come back to part 2 at another time without giving you again places to go and places to be inspired by. When we talk about being codependent, Patty and I are Olympic codependents. We can get into our end of this a little deeper. But Jake, I think it's important for you to end this piece by talking to people who are either clean and trying to stay clean, almost there, getting there, or people that haven't made the decision yet. As somebody who was addicted and will fight this every day for the rest of your life, what do you want to say to people that have walked with you or are in that walk now?
I think the biggest thing for any addict or alcoholic that is struggling now, for them to take away from this is that, it's not an overnight process. As I said, you have to it's something you have to work for, and you're not going to just make the decision and the next day everything's going to be dandy. Things are going to be hard in the beginning, but it all leads to something beautiful in the end, a life worth living, which is something everyone needs to remember, I think.
Couldn't say it better myself.
I love that.
Well done, Jake. Jake, thank you for doing this. And Patty, thank you as well. Jake's going to join us as we talk about codependency the next time on part 2 of this special edition of the Deep Six.
And thank you, Steve, as well, and Mickey.
Yeah, thanks. And I will pass that along to him too. We'd like to hear from you. We'd certainly like to share some of your stories as well. And if we can be of help in any way by way of resources, you can let us know that too. You can just drop me an email and I'll share with Patty and Jake. We'll just make it one email. We'll make it easy. Send it to thecochranshow@gmail.com and I will forward it as needed or answer the ones that I can. But The more good stories we hear, I think the more we help people. But if you're on the way to a good story, that's super important as well. Just make the decision. Make the decision to love yourself and live your life, because the world's a better place with you. Now, we need to thank a couple of people. The great Steve Kingston. Big fan. Hope to meet him someday. And also Ross Cochran, the executive producer of Live from My Office. Tim, who does
Tim Reed. Yeah.
Yep. It's a bang up job editing all this stuff. Am I missing anybody, Patty?
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Jake, because what an opportunity to be able to share this with people I love.
Well, we love you back. And go to pattysteele.com or any place you get a podcast and search Live from My Office, and you'll see all the stuff we do there. Most of it's fun.
Mm-hmm. And the Deep Six.
and the Deep Six, obviously. And but this is more important than anything we've done, I think. And I look forward to having more conversations like this. Thank you, Jake. You're a good man.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.